Hello and welcome back to Walton on Trent. It's March 2025 already, and this is episode 6 of Flange Squeal. A quick thank you for the massive positive response to the last episode. The overtly Mancunian flavour didn't seem to put you off, and channel subscribers have now rocketed above 300. More importantly, the feedback, comments and observations all give me great ideas and food for thought for the layout and future content. So thank you, it's hugely appreciated. I also just want to apologise for the variable focus I'm suffering at the moment. I got a new Apple iPhone 16 Pro a few weeks back and the cameras seem to have a mind of their own. I have to get in quite close between my loft beams and it does compromise the image occasionally. Any tips on that would be welcome. Another busy month here at Walton. My 158 has been chipped and customised. Building work has started in earnest. 2 more Accurascale 31s have arrived, and I've got big plans for the north of the layout to share with you at the end. Shall we crack on? As you can see, things look very different around here. I actually had to re-watch my last episode to remind myself of where I'd left things. You very quickly get used to new features. Platforms 4 and 5 on the left there have been painted and weathered now. I'm currently working my way around the platform edges and joins and touching in any uneven ballasting. You'll see some imperfections here and there in this month's footage, and actually the more I film, the more I spot. All part of the process. I've ballasted down as far as I will go for now. Any further will put me into the realms of trackside detail, and I'm not ready to start that yet. I've also removed the orange guardrail from the edge here. I was sick of ripping my knuckles on it, and I'll also be fitting extension panels between the beams in the near future. The signal box has moved closer to the station. It was on the other side of the road bridge before, but there'll be a different focus at that end, which I'll show you later on. I've filmed throughout the past month, so the station continuity will be all over the place in this episode, but this is what I've done. The big black box was built first. That was cut from a 4x2 sheet of 5mm ply. It's 4 foot long, 1 foot deep, and just over 4 inches high now the sheet has been attached on top. That hides and protects the south end of yard 5. The clearance is really close here, I just got away with that, and will eventually be continued all the way down. It's braced inside with stripwood and attached to the loft beams at the back. It also forms a back wall to platform 1, a foundation for Queensway House, which will sit here, and sets the street level at this end of the layout. With the street level set, I built a framework for the bus station area and scenic break here. I want this pitch black inside here, so I painted the track, cork and woodwork. I also fitted these 2mm MDF screens at certain points. I don't want to be filming inside the station and seeing rakes of lit coaches swooping around a 90-degree corner in the background. These screens will eliminate that by blocking off sight lines. I trimmed another 4x2 sheet of ply to fit the space, painted that black and fitted it over the top. I've now got the bones really of the station end structures. It's not 100% finished as I want to leave a bit of wriggle room for when I build down here. I'll need hand and tool access and gaps for wiring, etc. I have had another rethink about the actual buildings. It was going to be office block, station, shopping centre and bus station. However, the loft roof really suggests otherwise, and I think I'd be daft to fight it. I'd also need an unusually long office block to fill that back scene. So what I think I'll do instead is still have an office block at the end corner, but then the shopping centre will be next to it here, with the station concourse emerging from it. A shopping centre would be lower and longer, and I think fits that space much better. The bus station will still be here with either another office block above, taking advantage of the height here, or a car park over. I'm not sure yet, but whatever I choose needs to fill this area and obscure what's behind it, especially that corner. Logic says I should build from the back forwards. I don't want to be leaning over stuff I built, so I've started with platform 1. This was my original design. I've made concrete beams out of 6mm by 15mm stripwood. 15mm gives a scale beam of about 4 to 5 feet depth, which from sight looks about comparable to the concrete on the front of New Street Station, and feels about right in terms of major structural strength. The stripwood is 3 foot long, and I've left the first one intact, but wrapped it in sections of texture paper which I've cut to 11.25mm lengths. Visually, this gives me 8 even sections, or lintels, of a scale 28.5 foot, thereabouts. I've looked at videos and images of New Street a hell of a lot for this, and this kind of feels right by both eye and gut instinct. Leaving the actual timber intact all across removes the chances of wonkiness. The uprights are cut to fit, but within a mil or two of 8 centimetres each. The exceptions are these two, one starting at the ground level, and this one on the platform ramp. There had to be one, didn't there? The recessed wall areas are about 25 scale feet wide and 20 feet high. Height-wise, there's ample precedent here at the blue cliff of New Street. I bought a range of texture papers to look at. These are from Scale Model Scenery, and I think it's important to get eyes on the real thing, rather than trust the colour renderings of a website or someone else's layout video. Whenever I mention New Street Station, I bet most people immediately think grey. Well, it wasn't. The concrete was a buff colour. So I've opted for this one, heavily weathered buff concrete. In truth, it's not heavily weathered enough for my taste, and I'm a bit nervous about weathering texture paper. There's no removing it once it's done, so I need to think about that. Any tips? It also works well in contrast with this modern blue brick, which will feature heavily. They're easy to work with and wrap nicely. Yoo-hoo glue was recommended, and I've been happy with the results. The concrete walls and the brick inlays are cut from 2mm MDF. The brick sections are 4 cm high and overlap with the 6 cm high concrete panels. This gives the right look of depth and relief I wanted, and also allows me to hide any imperfections in my cutting, although I'm getting better with each panel. The concrete panels are all glued in, apart from one which was tight enough to friction fit. The brick sections are friction fit, and I'm showing them here today just for illustration, but I've actually removed them already as I'm going to detail them off-site and then refit them as part of one big coordinated scheme with the other platforms. It's important to me that the signage is aligned across the station and that each platform has the same visual rhythm, although platform 1 is a bit different, being a single-sided platform with a back wall. Really pleased with the overall impression, and it's a fairly easy programme of works to follow here now. This area will be outside of the station concourse building, and I've let the timber length suggest where that should start. It was always going to be somewhere here, so that natural break point there works. I've also run out of concrete paper, so it's a good place to stop. The next stage will be to work out how the front lintel interconnects over there and how it would be supported all the way across, and to visually represent that. It will, I think, involve 3 lift shafts, here, here and here. Once that's resolved, I can extend the walls across to the end there. I'm loving this, but it does feel like the more I do, the more there is to do. Anyone else feel like that? Surrounded by wires in all directions, DMUs were not common at Stafford in the early 90s. The only DMU service throughout my era was the 153 operated service from Stoke to Coventry, which ran infrequently down the Trent Valley. Nicknamed the Warwickshire Pullman, it served a handful of small rural stations which were just a blur to passengers on the London intercity services. From the spring '94 timetable, they were joined by several Class 158 workings in each direction from the northwest to Birmingham. An 0810 departure from Preston to New Street formed the first of 3 off-peak northbound journeys back to Piccadilly. There were 3 south from Piccadilly to New Street, the last of which, an 1800 departure, returned north from New Street to Preston at 2010. The first of 3 journeys from Lime Street to Birmingham at 1648 continued to Cambridge, followed by departures at 1748 and 2018. Northbound services left New Street at 0751, International at 1733 and New Street at 1905. The Birmingham-Liverpool route had been effectively downgraded to regional railways already and was largely run by Class 310 units until 323 started to appear mid-90s. The Manchester route was still a major intercity cross-country corridor, and the handful of 158 services seemed to be infills in the timetable. The passenger timetable show Liverpool services as RR for regional railways, whereas the Preston and Manchester diagrams do not, and always conveyed first-class accommodation. I've read they were officially intercity services, but I'd love to hear from anyone who knows more. So 158s were not big players at Stafford, but there were enough of them to justify me running this lovely model from Bachmann. This is model 31496 in Regional Railways Express livery, and is actually a replacement for the one I first showed you in December. When I sound-checked that one in January and started to run it, I discovered it had a dreadful grindy noise from one of the drive shafts. Kerno models replaced it for me immediately, and while this one still has a slight noise, it's way better than the first one. Are they all like this? It's a handsome model with lovely detail. I especially like the area around the passenger doors, and the low-profile motors mean that there are no obtrusive blocks or panels interrupting the seating compartments, like in the Bachmann 150 for example. The trade-off is that the seats and tables are quite shallow, and I've had to be quite brutal with passenger amputations to get them to sit right. I fitted the wheel tappers sound file on the Plux 22 Lock Sound 5 decoder, and I'll show you all the sounds and functions in a moment. The chip socket is under this body part here. It clips on and off quite easily. You only need the one chip, as both cars are electronically connected here. I also did a speaker upgrade, as the standard fit speaker sounded a bit tinny. This is a 22 by 13 by 6mm bass enhanced speaker from Roads and Rails, and there's a good how-to guide on his YouTube channel if you fancy doing this. It's dead easy. The hard part is probably removing the body shell, which I found quite tight. What did you think? Personally, I still think the sound's a little thin. Not sure if that's the speaker or the file or both, or maybe I have the volume too high and it's distorting a little. I'll play around with the volume CVs after this, I think. But overall, I'm really happy with this model, and it adds a nice bit of realism and variety to the layout. I've also bought a pair of additional body shells and a seating inlay. The Preston Manchester services with first class seating were operated by sets with a yellow first class seating flash at the front of one carriage, and should therefore have a glazed off first class compartment in the first two windows. I'm going to model one of those sets and renumber it with these spares. I don't hesitate in adding extra 87s or 47s for my intercities or parcels, but a second sound chip to 158 for a handful of services isn't something I can justify, even though these are currently under 200 quid. But 70 quid to do an occasional body swap lets me run pretty much 2 for 1. I do let these little differences niggle at me, I'm afraid, and it may well be an extravagance, especially as I'll still have to accept that the unit in either guise will be forever going to Nottingham. Two more Accurascale 31s have arrived here in the past month. Like 432, these are perfect fits for my location and era straight out the box, being based at Crewe for 420 and Bescot for 514. I'm not going to go over all the features and functions again, but I will just comment on the exceptional livery application of these models. It's what struck me first on all three of them as soon as I opened up the boxes. The deep lustrous BR blue on 432, the very smart Intercity mainline on 420, and the striking grey and yellow engineers livery on 514. Intercity light grey has tripped up at least two manufacturers in the past, but I think Accurascale have nailed it here on 420. It looks right at home alongside my other mainline locos, Bachmann's 47528 and 90134, plus my rail match repaint of 87033. It's also a good match with my Bachmann coaches. The Dutch yellow on 514 looks a little more golden yellow than on my Bachmann 47 or this Hornby Sea Cow. I think they're probably a bit closer to the real shade, but it's not as off-putting as the lemony yellow of these Dapol turbots. I really like the printed cast arrows and depot plaques. Silver can sometimes print a little fuzzy, but these are both really sharp and glossy. Good enough to do without the etched ones provided, perhaps. I've done the buffer beams and fitted magnetic coupler on the back, and I've also added the same loco-specific crew as in 432. 31420 started life at Hornsey Depot in North London in February 1960 as D5591. In March 1974 it became 31172 under tops, but after only 5 months it entered works for ETH fitting, emerging as 31420 in October 74. I found pictures of it working all over the country south of the M62 line, but it gravitated towards the northwest in the early 90s, I assume out of crew diesel, and gained its intercity mainline livery at the start of 1992. It was a regular on North Wales services, but gradually drifted down onto stock movements and departmental workings. Pictures of its final year suggest it migrated to the southeast before entering storage at Old Oak Common in 2001. With 40 years of service, this must have been one of the most long-lasting 31s, and it survived another 6 years before meeting the cutter's torch in Rotherham in 2007. 31514 was built about 18 months later, entering traffic as D5814 in September 1961, allocated to Darnall Depot in Sheffield, and then Tinsley when it opened. It was one of the first 31s to be selected for ETH fitting, which it received in late 1973, along with a tops number of 31414. In this guise, it was used to heat and move empty stock into Paddington Station until it eventually transferred to March Depot in 1983. A regular on the Norwich-Birmingham service, it eventually set up home in the Midlands, working out of Bescot in engineer's livery after having its ETH isolated in 1990. It was withdrawn in February 1999 and entered preservation, surviving to this day at the Midland Railway in Derbyshire. 31s were very much into their twilight years during my era. The only timetabled working was the Bridgwater-Sellafield nuclear flask train, which was booked for a coal sector 31. I'm hoping for one of those and a second run from Accurascale. Until then, 420 or 432 will step in. There were a few nuclear flask trains running in and out of Sellafield, but the one that I'm interested in is the one that ran all the way up from Bridgwater in Somerset. This carried nuclear waste from the Hinkley Point power station complex on the Bristol Channel. There's no railway to this site, so the first part of the journey was made by road to a special rail terminal where the flask could be hoisted onto a wagon. This one's at Bridgwater, and this one's at the power station at Trawsfynydd in North Wales. Departing around 2 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays only, the train would pass through Stafford around 1:30 in the morning en route to a 5-hour layover at Basford Hall. I've often seen it described, in fact, as the Bridgwater Crew flask train, although it does carry the same 7M53 head code all the way through to Sellafield. The return journey would depart Sellafield around 17:20 on Mondays and Wednesdays, and would pass Stafford between 10:30 and 11:30 at night, depending on the length of stay at Basford Hall, which seemed to vary from year to year. Working timetables suggest it waited at Bescot for around 6 hours, although I read somewhere that the train could run pretty much as and when in either direction, possibly as a security precaution. As usual, any further information from anyone watching would be welcome in the comments below. The train could vary in length from one to several flasks, with barrier wagons and brake vans always in attendance. Haulage was booked for Class 31s, drawn from a dedicated pool at Crew Diesel under the coal sector. The trains are identified in working timetables as TLC, trainload coal. Pairs were common, and that's something I would like to do here at Walton eventually, but there was precedent for single loco workings, although picture descriptions online imply this was the exception rather than the rule. This is a cheap rake to pull together. You can pick up these brake vans for around 25 quid. I got the F&A Flass wagon for under 40, I think, and the two barrier wagons were chopped down and repainted from old Hornby EWS HEA wagons for about 10 quid each. I sliced off most of the hopper, then fitted a piece of plasticard over the top and sanded it into shape before painting it black. I think the top could sit a little lower, but I'm not going to lose sleep over that. I haven't found a ready-to-run barrier wagon like this, but you could just as easily use a simple rail freight red HEA, although they seem pretty rare too. Not difficult to do your own though. Apart from this, it was ad hoc departmental workings and stock movements. There were 4 yards relatively close together on the West Coast Main Line: Arpley, Springs Branch, Crewe Basford Hall and Bescot. There was also a track maintenance depot on the south side of Stafford Station. There still is, in fact, and in videos of the time you can often just make out 31s and engineers' wagons in the background going about their work. This was their most common duty in my era, and it's what they'll do most for me. I've got some sea cows here I need to sort the couplings out on, and a set of salmon wagons due later this year, so there'll be lots of ballast and rail movements. I do fancy one of these YOB cranes too, and maybe an inspection saloon. There were also 2 intercity carriage sidings, Longsight in South Manchester and Oxley in Wolverhampton. And 31s could often be seen moving coaches and DVTs, plus postal vans up and down between, I assume, those 2 sites, and probably further afield. These duties seemed to fall under RES eventually, and it became more common to see crews RES 47s than their 31s. But 31s were always buzzing about Stafford, sometimes just light, on their own or in pairs, and you'll see them doing that around Walton too. They're supporting actors rather than stars of the show, but these are cracking little models which look and sound great, and my layout wouldn't feel right without them.
Once in your life you find her, someone who turns your heart around, and next thing you know you're closing down the town. Wake up and it's still with you, even though you left your way across town, wondering to yourself, hey, what have I found? When you get caught between the moon and New York City, I know it's crazy, but it's true. If you get caught between the moon and New York City, best that you can do, best that you can do is fall in love. Arthur, he does as he pleases. All of his life, his master's toys, and deep in his heart, he's just a boy, living his life one day at a time. He's showing himself a pretty good time, laughing about the way they want him to be. When you get caught between the moon and New York City, I know it's crazy, but it's true. If you get caught between the moon and New York City, best that you can do, best that you can do, best that you can do is fall in love.
Firming up my station ideas has also forced me to put more thought into the scenic north end of the layout. Until now, my project plan has simply stated office cluster and street scene. Wall to wall is a scale third of a mile here, and I think having it filled with A-grade commercial premises would suggest a much bigger city than Walton actually is. I was inadvertently recreating the west end of New Street Station. This end should be a bit more of an inner city hinterland, but I still need a hefty scenic break, not least to try to disguise my dreaded loft beams. I've come up with something I hope will be quite striking. So, where am I? Well, I'm somewhere which has a very special place in the hearts of thousands of Waltonians. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Here he is again with those bloody boxes. There's real wall there, look. It's a good way of seeing what it's like to live with big structures on your layout, and this is going to be big. Now, before you all get too excited or think, blimey, he's really lost the plot this time, I'm not building an entire stadium, and I won't be painting and fitting 30,000 people in football shirts. The main purpose of this structure is a scenic break, and I won't be designing and building the interior of the stadium. This will be a goal end stand with an appropriate street scene outside and some kind of back scene to end the whole layout. Here's my prototype. This is the Stan Cullis stand at Molineux, the home of Wolverhampton Wanderers, my hometown club. I'm looking to create the kind of cliff wall of the back of the stand and a glimpse of the road and buildings behind it. The idea behind my track alignment here was to have this curve to trick the eye into thinking the tracks curve to the right, going into this tunnel, rather than the sharp left they actually make. The ground over the tracks would be too shallow for tall buildings, and I don't think housing would be on it either. So I'm going to keep the building line well back on the right. To be honest, I have restricted myself a bit, but I just need to roll with it now. It'll align with that wooden batten there. I want the scene to suggest that the tunnel is only short and the tracks actually re-emerge roughly where that bus is. I'll try to reinforce that impression with either a building line or a tree line right at the back there. On my layout, the track would run kind of where the red line is here. There is limited space here for a street scene, but there's room to build something, even if it's somewhere where the camera will never linger. Molineux sits on Waterloo Road. I've picked a different battle and called this Trafalgar Road. If you're thinking this is way too central for a football ground, well, here's an aerial view of Wolverhampton city centre, throttled by the very obvious ring road. The blue arrow points at the station. Molineux is circled in an appropriate colour. Closer up, this is also about a third of a mile between the two locations, and you can see that the stadium is only separated from the city centre by the ring road. Similarly, if you've ever been to Newcastle, you'll know how St James's Park towers above the central area. The immediate surroundings will suggest an inner city area of old terraced houses, typical of an old industrial city. This is Anfield, to coin a phrase. You can see it sits right in and utterly dominates rows of terraced housing in this part of Liverpool. I really like this shot. It would be good to capture something like that. The tracks would roughly align to the arrow pointing to the back of the boards and across the road. The precedent for railway proximity is right here at Old Trafford, which even has its own platform. And this is St Andrews, the home of Birmingham City. I know, I'm sorry. I'll base it on the original Stan Cullis stand, which was built in 1992. Molineux is very typical of the stadium architecture of the early 90s, when many clubs rebuilt their crumbling old stadiums in the aftermath of the Hillsborough disaster in 1989 and the Taylor report into stadium safety. My era also coincides with the start of the Premier League, when big money really started to flow into the English game. Not sure of the right scale yet. This doesn't look too far off. I'm thinking of Walton United as a historic club, founder member of the Football League, with a respectable but not remarkable list of achievements. Steady mid-table, cup runs, the occasional foray into Europe, and there's opportunity for some related scenes outside, and I think some matchday sound effects from within perhaps. I'm not going to make it too big. It's worth remembering that the Old Trafford of 1992 was little more than half the size it is today, at around 40,000 capacity. I do get a smile on my face when I think what I could do here, but the first focus is the station. This end is some way off yet, but it's good to have the big scene at either end fairly clear in my head now for the first time, and a couple of shots here really emphasise the scale distance of the whole layout now. When you're watching your trains fly past on their own, it's easy to forget the scale distance they're covering, But from the station here you can get a feel of a realistic strip of an urban scene. And even here, halfway along, from the red bus to the blue bus, you definitely get that sense of perspective. That'll do it for this month. No prizes for guessing what I'll be cracking on with now. I'll show you my progress next month, and every month for as long as it takes, in fact. There's tons to do. We'll also take a look at the regional railway services from Birmingham International to Holyhead, and the Class 37s I use to haul them. Until then, thank you so much for watching. See you soon. Bye bye.